A courtroom officer slapped a teenage witness in front of everyone, but the whole room froze when the boy calmly asked, "Can I speak to my father?" Moments later, a US Supreme Court justice walked in. The strangest part? The boy didn't even flinch. 17-year-old Quentin Ray stood there in a plain white button-up, arms relaxed at his sides, as Sergeant Nolan Creel's hand struck his face. The sharp, ugly smack echoed off the walls. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "Did he just—" No one moved. Judge Lena Brewster stayed silent, mouth slightly open. The jurors stared. Even the prosecutor, a thin man in a grey suit named Ronald Blaylock, froze, pen hovering over his notepad. All eyes locked on Quentin. Not because they pitied him, not because anyone rushed to help, but because he didn't react. No flinch, no anger, no tears, just a slow, steady breath. Then, calm as ever, he looked at the judge and repeated, "May I speak to my father?" It was the first full sentence he'd spoken since the slap. The room stayed dead silent. Sergeant Creel, a wall of a man with buzzed blonde hair, didn't apologize. He stood near the witness stand, hand still half raised, as if unsure whether he'd meant to hit the boy or stop him from something worse. His face wasn't regretful. It was fear. Fear he'd messed up, badly. Blaylock finally found his voice. "Your father? Do you need a guardian, son?" Quentin didn't glance at him, didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the judge. "Justice Aurelian Ray," he said. That name changed everything. A ripple tore through the room. The gallery erupted in murmurs. A juror jerked back like they'd been stung. The court clerk fumbled her files. Creel's jaw clenched, his arm dropping to his side. Judge Brewster adjusted her glasses, leaning back as the weight of the moment crashed down. "Did you say Justice Aurelian Ray?" "Of the U.S. Supreme Court." Quentin gave one nod, calm, controlled. Two, calm. And just like that, the courtroom saw him differently. No longer just some kid in a crisp shirt, the kind they assumed was here for skipping school or worse. Now he had a name they knew, a name tied to power, prestige, and federal courtrooms in D.C. But Quentin didn't bask in it. No smile, no smirk, same posture, same steady gaze, as if he'd known this wouldn't have happened if they'd truly seen him from the start. Sergeant Creel stepped back, voice low. "I thought—" He looked like he was reaching for something, his body language. "He raised his hand because I sneezed," Quentin said flatly. "I was covering my mouth." Another wave of silence. Then, as if timed by fate, the courtroom doors swung open. A man walked in, charcoal suit, steel grey hair, deep lines carved by time, not stress. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just strode down the aisle like the world itself was holding its breath. Justice Aurelian Ray. He didn't look left or right, didn't acknowledge the stunned faces. His eyes were locked on one person, his son. And for the first time, Quentin's expression shifted. Not into fear, not even relief, but something quieter. Calm recognition. The look of someone whose backup had arrived, not to fight for them, but to witness what they'd already endured. Judge Brewster stood, so did the jury. Even Creel stiffened, spine straight, but it was too late for posture to undo what had happened. Justice Ray didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. All he said was, "Who laid hands on my son?" No one answered. The weight of those words settled over the room like a storm no one saw coming. Quentin wasn't raised to waste words. Back home in Bloomington, Minnesota, inside a quiet two-story house filled with law books and family photos, he grew up with structure, not the cold kind, but the steady sort. Folded napkins at dinner, books before bed, conversations with his father that felt more like chess matches than chats. He wasn't loud, didn't need to be. His mother, Simone Ray, died when he was 8, breast cancer. It wrecked the house, but didn't break it. Justice Ray made sure of that. He turned grief into something solid. Every Friday, no matter what, he flew home for dinner. That table meant something. Quentin learned early that the world didn't always reward politeness, that sometimes, no matter how straight you stood, people still judged you before you spoke. But his father didn't teach him to scream about it. He taught him to outlast it. Every morning before school, Justice Ray said the same thing. You don't have to be loud to be heard. Let the silence say what their noise can't. Quentin held on to that, not out of fear. Belief. He'd watched his father dismantle arguments with just a pause. Seen how silence, used right, could cut deeper than any shout. It became his armor. At Lincoln High, Quentin didn't blend in. Quentin didn't try to stand out, but he didn't blend in either. One of the few black students in his grade, he stayed sharp. Debate team, top grades, no trouble with teachers. The school counselor called him impressively composed. That was her way of saying he didn't react how she expected. But not everyone saw his calm as strength. Some kids took it as arrogance. Others saw a challenge, like he thought he was better than them, like he needed to be humbled. Especially Bo Haldeman. A loud, thick-necked linebacker with a mouth faster than his brain, Bo hated Quentin. Maybe it was how Quentin ignored his hallway taunts. Maybe it was how he corrected teachers without sounding like a know-it-all. Whatever the reason, the tension simmered until the week before the trial. Quentin was waiting in the school parking lot after debate practice when Bo and two friends cornered him. You think you're above us or something? Bo sneered. Quentin adjusted his backpack. You got something to say? Say it. Bo didn't answer with words. He shoved Quentin, not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to send a message. Quentin didn't shove back, didn't flinch, but he did report it. That's how he ended up in court. Called as a witness in a harassment hearing, Quentin just wanted it over. Bo's family had fought to keep the case out of school records, claiming the school was targeting their son. So they dragged it into court, public, messy, and suddenly Quentin was subpoenaed. He didn't want drama, didn't want headlines. He just wanted it to stop. But people missed that. They saw a calm, polished kid in a courtroom and assumed he could handle anything. They didn't see the months of sideways glances, the teachers praising him for being so articulate, like it shocked them. They didn't feel the weight he carried, walking into rooms where people had already decided who he was before he spoke. But this time, the slap wouldn't be swept under the rug. This time, power was watching. A dropped lunch tray, a shoulder bump in the hallway, words sharp enough to pull the assistant principal into it. What should have stayed a school issue blew up because of who was involved. The security footage showed Quentin walking away first. No yelling, no swinging, not even a shove, just turning his back. But Bo and his friends weren't done. They followed, hungry for a reaction. On camera, Bo shoved Quentin from behind. Quentin stumbled, but caught himself. He turned, said something too quiet for the mic to pick up. Then Bo shoved him again, harder. Still, Quentin didn't hit back. It wasn't until a teacher sprinted over that it ended. Quentin's collar was stretched, his backpack tossed aside. He didn't look angry or scared. Just tired. The school launched an investigation, standard procedure. But Bo's father, Colton Haldeman, wasn't having it. A local big shot with 3 hardware stores and a generous donor reputation, Colton had pull. When the school moved to suspend Bo and mandate counseling, Colton fought back, called it targeting, held a press conference crying reverse discrimination, dismissing Quentin's account as overblown. That's how it landed in Hennepin County Juvenile Court, not as a school hearing, but a full-blown harassment case. And Quentin? He just wanted to move on. He never asked to be a symbol, not of fairness, not of bias, not of justice. He just wanted to finish senior year, keep his GPA intact, and get into Brown like he'd planned since 10th grade. Instead, he prepped for court. Justice Ray didn't try to talk him out of it. The night the subpoena arrived, they sat at the kitchen table in silence. "I can hire someone," his father finally said. "You don't have to speak if you're not ready," I want to speak, Quentin replied. His father studied him a long moment before nodding. Then speak carefully. Quentin ironed his shirt 3 times the night before. Not because it was wrinkled, but because he knew people would dissect every detail. A scuffed shoe would say something so about him, slouching. He doesn't care. Too confident. Arrogant. Too nervous. Guilty. He wasn't on trial, but in some ways he was. That morning, he waited outside courtroom 3B. His name wasn't on the docket as a defendant, but when a clerk called it, heads turned. Just the way he walked in made people stiffen, like they were bracing for something. Sergeant Crail stood near the door, arms crossed, scanning the room like cops do, judging who looked off. When Quentin passed him, Crail didn't speak. Just held his gaze a second too long. That's where the tension began, not with words, with looks, with assumptions. The hearing was supposed to be routine, Quentin's testimony, lawyers' motions, the judge's ruling. But nothing about this was routine. It should have been a routine hearing, but it never got that far because Sergeant Crail's suspicion had been simmering long before Quentin took the stand. No one expected it to explode into violence, not in front of a judge, not inside a courtroom, and, definitely, not toward a witness who hadn't even finished speaking. The Hennepin County courtroom was ordinary, pale wood benches, padded chairs, a clock ticking too loud in the silence. But that morning, the air felt thick, like pressure was crawling up the walls, the kind that makes you sit straighter without knowing why. Quentin sat in the witness box, legs still, hands loose. He'd been called up faster than expected. The prosecutor, Ronald Blaylock, gave him a quick nod but no warm-up, no easing in. State your name for the record. Quentin Ray. Your age? 17. And you're currently enrolled at Lincoln High School? Yes. Blaylock cleared his throat. Can you describe what happened after school on April 3rd? Quentin paused, not because he didn't know, but because he'd been taught to let people listen. I was in the parking lot, just left to bait. Waiting for my dad to pick me up, Bo Haldeman and 2 others approached me. He pushed me twice. I didn't respond physically. I told a staff member, and it was reported. Blaylock nodded. Were you injured? No. Did you provoke Mr. Haldeman? No. Did you make any threats? No. Quentin's voice didn't shake, didn't rush. Every word landed evenly, rehearsed, precise. But as he spoke, the room shifted. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Too calm, too sure. Some people don't like that. Sergeant Crail stood against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Not just listening, watching. Like he was waiting for Quentin to slip up. Judge Brewster noticed, glancing at him more than once, but stayed silent. The defense attorney, Howard Sedgwick, leaned forward. Neat hair, stiff tie, hands clenched just a little too tight. When his turn came, he walked up slowly, legal pad in hand, like it held secrets. Quentin, he said, tone polished to the point of suspicion. You said you didn't respond physically, correct? Correct. Not even a raised arm, a defensive gesture? I lifted my hands to keep space between us, that's all. And how would a bystander interpret that motion? Could it seem aggressive? Not unless they wanted it to. A few people shifted. Sedgwick scribbled something, then looked up. No history of aggression at school? No fights? No referrals? None. And you believe the school acted appropriately? They did what they could, but that's why we're here now. The exchange was clean. Too clean, like Sedgwick was poking for a reaction that wasn't there. When he stepped back, he shot Creel a glance. Quick, but Quentin caught it. Then it happened. Judge Brewster called a 5-minute recess. Quentin stepped down, heading toward his seat, but as he passed Creel, the officer muttered something. Quentin stopped. What did you say? Creel didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, loud enough for the room to hear. Keep your hands to yourself next time. I wasn't... Quentin began. Then Creel slapped him. The sound cracked like a gunshot. But it wasn't the slap that froze the room. It was Quentin's face, still composed, almost tired. And the fact that he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink, time didn't slow. It shattered. Judge Brewster shot up, chair screeching. "Sergeant Crail!" Her voice was sharp, disbelieving. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Crail didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on Quentin, who slowly turned his head back forward. "I told him to keep his hands down," Crail said, but his voice wavered, like he already knew he'd messed up. Badly. Blaylock dropped his pen. Sedgwick stood frozen. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to step in. Quentin didn't touch his face, didn't cry, just said again, louder this time, "May I speak to my father?" The silence this time was heavier. A collective realization rolled through the room, the quiet before a storm. Judge Brewster adjusted her glasses. "Your father is present?" "He asked me to text him if something happened," Quentin said. Before anyone could react, a phone buzzed at the clerk's desk. Then the courtroom doors swung open. Justice Aurelian Ray stepped inside. He didn't rush, didn't speak, didn't look at anyone but his son. Quentin didn't smile, didn't move, just held his father's gaze with that same quiet understanding they'd always shared. Justice Ray approached the bench. No permission asked, no protocol followed, just a voice, cool and cutting. "I was informed there was an incident." Judge Brewster straightened. "Justice Ray, this isn't—" "Procedure was broken the moment a court officer assaulted my son during testimony." Crail flinched, not visibly, but something inside him crumpled. Justice Ray turned to him slowly, each second deliberate. "You touched him." Crail opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You thought," Justice Ray repeated, voice sharp as a blade. The problem wasn't volume, it wasn't theatrics. Justice Ray's words didn't need either. His quiet statement filled the courtroom more completely than any shout ever could. "You saw a calm, unarmed teenager and decided he was a threat. In a courthouse, under supervision, with a judge present." Crail's hands trembled, just slightly, but everyone noticed. Quentin sat back down, not because he was told to, because he'd said what needed saying. The rest was now between the room and his father. Justice Ray continued, tone measured, but cutting. "You didn't restrain him. You didn't warn him. You struck him." He turned to Judge Brewster. "This isn't about my position. It's about precedent. If an officer can assault a witness mid-testimony and keep his badge, we're not protecting anyone. We're performing justice as theatre." He stepped back, hands folded. The courtroom held its breath. No one wanted to speak first, because whatever came next had to matter. No one said it aloud, but authority had shifted. Judge Brewster still sat on the bench, technically presiding, but every eye tracked Justice Aurelian Ray, not because of his title, but because the air itself bent around him, like the law had walked in wearing a face people recognized, but rarely saw this close. Judge Brewster cleared her throat. "Justice Ray, I understand your presence complicates procedure, but this will be handled through proper channels." Ray nodded once. "My concern isn't just my son, it's the message this room just sent to every young person who walks in here hoping for protection." Brewster opened her mouth, but Ray wasn't finished. "I've reviewed police conduct cases, ruled on Fourth Amendment violations, written opinions on qualified immunity, and for 20 years I've watched public trust erode in the very systems I swore to uphold." His gaze flicked to Crail, now stiff-shouldered, eyes down. "So tell me, how do we rebuild that trust when an officer strikes a witness in open court and assumes there'll be no consequence?" Brewster leaned back, uneasy. "There will be consequences." "Assurances aren't enough." Ray's voice never rose, but each word landed heavier. "Visibility is required. Accountability must be documented." He glanced at Quentin, still patient, still unreadable. Crail finally croaked out, I made a mistake. I accept responsibility." Justice Ray tilted his head. What mistake? Be specific. I misread his body language. Thought he was being disrespectful when he raised a hand to sneeze. And that warranted physical contact? Crail had no answer. Judge Brewster spoke up. Sergeant Crail, you're relieved of courtroom duty immediately. Surrender your badge pending review by courthouse administration and the sheriff's office. A murmur of approval rippled through the room, but Justice Ray wasn't done. With respect, the review can't be internal. I'll request an independent DOJ investigator. Brewster nodded slowly. Understood. Only then did Justice Ray step back. He looked at Quentin again, and this time Quentin's expression shifted, just slightly. A quiet exhale, not relief, but release. The room missed it. His father didn't. Sedgwick, the defense attorney, awkwardly stepped forward. Your Honor, do we continue? The question hung in the air. Quentin stood. I'll finish my testimony. Judge Brewster nodded, impressed, but careful not to show it. Very well, Mr. Ray. Return to the stand. Quentin sat back in the witness chair. This time, no interruptions, no muttered insults, just silence and listening ears. Blaylock, the prosecutor, cleared his throat. Quentin, would you like a moment? No, sir. Then if you're ready, you were describing when Bo Haldeman made contact with you in the parking lot. Quentin nodded. He shoved me. I didn't shove back. He tried again. I stepped away. That's all. Blaylock leaned in. Why didn't you react physically? Quentin looked out over the room before answering. Because I knew it wouldn't be seen the same way. Nothing else needed saying. Everyone understood the real trial had already happened, and not a word of it was in the transcript. The rest of the hearing dragged, not because the case was complex, but because the room had changed. Every question, every objection felt heavier, like they were being weighed in a different courtroom entirely. Quentin answered plainly. The facts were clear. Bo had approached him. Shoved him twice. The school's footage and 3 teacher statements backed him. Even the defense's objections grew half-hearted, their arguments thinning like smoke. But no one cared about Bo anymore. All eyes kept drifting to Crail, now slumped on a side bench, the shine gone from his uniform. After closing statements, Judge Brewster called a recess before her ruling. People spilled into the hallway pretending to scroll phones but really watching the Rays. Quentin sat near vending machines. His father stood across from him, hands behind his back. Minutes passed in silence. Then Quentin spoke. Do you think they'll do anything real? Justice Ray didn't look over. They're already doing something real. They're listening. That's not the same as acting. It never is. But listening is where it starts. Always has been. Quentin didn't answer. He didn't need platitudes. He wanted harder truths. Justice Ray sat beside him. You once asked why I never lose my temper in court. Quentin glanced over. Yeah, I remember. I told you, anger makes things louder, silence makes things clear. A pause, then quieter. But I wasn't always calm. At your age, I wanted to tear down every wall in my way. Then I realized walls are built to survive rage. They're not built to survive truth, spoken clearly, steadily, over time. That's what erodes them. Quentin nodded, not to agree, but to show he'd heard. The bailiff reappeared. Judge is ready. Back in court, Brewster read her findings. Bo Haldeman. Guilty of targeted harassment, suspension plus behavioral intervention, not jail but a permanent record stain. Sergeant Creel. Given the severity and visibility of this incident. Her gaze locked onto Crail as she continued, but everyone already knew. This wasn't ending with a slap on the wrist. The system had been forced to look at itself, and for once, it didn't like what it saw. I am formally requesting an external investigation through the Department of Justice, Justice Ray declared, along with a public review of all prior courtroom incidents involving this officer. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Crail didn't argue, didn't move, just sat there like a forgotten statue, the kind people stop admiring after the pedestal cracks. When court adjourned, the press swarm outside told the whole story. The reporters hadn't been there that morning. They came after the slap, after the name, after the power shift. Justice Ray shielded Quentin as they exited. The boy looked weary but unbroken. "Justice Ray," a reporter shoved forward. "Any comment on today's events?" A calculated pause, then, "I came to watch my son testify. I leave with a reminder." Another beat. "That civility doesn't begin with a uniform, it begins with discipline. That respect must not only be expected, it must be demonstrated." Quentin met the camera flashes but stayed silent. He didn't need to speak. Because this time, in that silence, something shifted. Not in the air, but in the people watching. This time, they couldn't look away. In the following days, courtroom clips exploded online. Yes, the slap circulated endlessly. But it was the freeze frame afterward that truly haunted. Quentin, statue still, staring ahead while Creel's hand hovered mid-air. Headlines varied. Supreme Court Justice's son assaulted in courtroom. Officer suspended after striking teen witness. But the ones that lingered were simpler. He didn't flinch. Back at Lincoln High, normalcy didn't return. Classmates eyed Quentin differently, some with awkward apologies, others with avoidance. Bo Haldeman's family retreated from public view. His father's school board campaign signs vanished overnight. Yet something more significant bloomed. Classrooms buzzed with new conversations about fairness, power, and safety, discussions that hadn't happened before. Teachers noticed, parents too. 2 weeks post-hearing, Quentin sat across from his father at their kitchen table. No cameras, no audience, just the familiar tick of the wall clock. "Regret going through with it?" Justice Ray asked. Quentin shook his head. "Just tired." "Tired is part of it," his father replied, swirling his water glass. "But tired isn't the end. I just hate that it took all that for people to hear me." Quentin exhaled. "Now I know how much they weren't listening before." Justice Ray didn't soften the truth. Instead, he slid a folder across the table, a U.S. Marshal Service letter detailing the launched investigation into Creel's conduct and prior complaints. "They're watching now," Justice Ray said. Quentin didn't smile, just nodded once, that particular nod shared between people who know the road is long but keep walking anyway. The school instituted new officer training, not just on procedure, but on bias and de-escalation. Small steps, but steps forward. People finally understood what happened to Quentin wasn't rare. What was rare was having a Supreme Court justice as a father to force accountability. The real lesson wasn't about race or uniforms, it was about perception, about how some kids must first prove they're not threats before anyone hears their words, about silence, both the kind that gets punished and the kind that holds power. Quentin gave no interviews, joined no campaigns. He simply returned to school, maintained his grades, and applied to Brown as planned. Yet people remembered him, not for what he said, but for what he didn't do. He didn't shout. He didn't strike back. He didn't break. That quiet dignity under pressure left a deeper mark than any speech could. Stories like this don't truly end. They echo, in how students sit straighter when quiet kids raise hands, in how officers adjust their posture during testimony, in how one boy reminded a courtroom what justice should feel like. The most powerful moment often comes after the climax, in the pause where change begins. Quentin never sought to make a statement. He came to tell the truth, and in doing so showed the world what dignity looks like under fire. Creel didn't just cross a line, he exposed the fragile divide between justice in theory and justice in practice. What made this matter wasn't Quentin's famous father, or the gasps when his name was spoken. It was how he stood, not just when struck, but after, when everyone expected rage. He offered something stronger, stillness. That strength doesn't come from privilege or power, but from knowing exactly who you are when others try to redefine you. It reminds us how perception warps reality, and how many Quentins walk into rooms already burdened by weights they didn't choose. Justice isn't just delivered from benches or rulings. Sometimes it comes from being truly seen, without bias, without flinching, even when you raise a hand to sneeze. There are countless Quentins out there, quiet kids who do everything right yet get treated as threats. The work isn't just punishing harm, but unlearning the reflexes that cause it. It's examining why Crail saw danger in a composed teenager within a sanctuary meant for fairness. That frozen moment still circulates, still debated, but perhaps also learned from. So when someone claims silence is weakness, remember the boy who stood motionless while the room burned, letting truth speak louder than any slap. If this story resonated, share it, not for clicks, but because someone else might need it. And if you believe such stories deserve light, help amplify them, because the more we spotlight these experiences, the harder it becomes to mistake silence for invisibility.